Here we're looking at example 6, but before we can dive into him, we actually have to go over a quick definition. So for any function that has some number in front of an absolute value times the absolute value of some number b now in front of x minus c, and then finally a plus d, the a and the b, so in other words, this coefficient in front of our absolute value and this coefficient in front of our x, are actually going to determine now our slopes. So before, it was kind of just this a value that was determining the slope. Now, though, it's having a direct impact also with that number in front of x. In previous cases, we actually didn't have a number here. It was just a 1. And so that's why we just had the slope of whatever this number was in front. The b and the c, though, determine actually now our x-intercept. And how they work is we're going to take this item, this bx minus c, and set it equal to 0, and then pretty much just solve for x. Now, believe it or not, in previous cases we were actually doing that, but we didn't really have a b here, so we didn't have to worry as much about things. So for example, if we go back to, let's just say right here, notice how we have a 1 in front of x. Well, if we wanted to solve for that x-intercept, all we would have done was set this 1x plus 3 is equal to 0 and try and solve for x. So we would subtract 3 from both sides and then divide both sides by 1. But again, that really doesn't matter or change much because you're still going to get whatever this was. So x is negative 3. So you're still trying to solve for, even before we were still solving for what this x variable was, but before we kind of just said just take the opposite of him because it's going to come out to be that. The game changes though a little bit when you have a number in front of x. But again, it pretty much is following the same exact process. You just set this stuff inside of that absolute value equal to 0 and then just solve for x. So for example, looking at 6a, let's go ahead and find the slopes of this particular item and as well the vertex. Well, to find our slopes, we're taking this number on the outside, this a and this b, and multiplying those together. So then we end up with 15 and also negative 15, because you have to keep in mind that this is a v. So if we just had, for example, the v looking something like this, well, from here, it's that considered positive 15, but on the left side of that vertex, it would be considered that negative 15. So that's where we're seeing both slopes for this particular absolute value. Now when we're trying to figure out the vertex, we're going to go ahead and set this piece inside that absolute value equal to 0. So 3x minus 9 is equal to 0, and try and solve for x from here. So we would add 9 to both sides, divide both sides by 3. So it looks like x comes out to be 3. It's no longer we just take the opposite of this guy. Our x variable actually changes and is now impacted by this number right in front of x. So that is our x value. Our y value is much simpler to find. It's just like before. We literally just take this guy just as he is. So our vertex comes out to be 3, 1. And so that would be our slope and vertex for A. Looking at B, again, we just multiply these two numbers, this A and this B, together to get the slopes. So that slope is going to come out to be 4 and negative 4. Now trying to figure out the vertex. Again, the x variable is the only one that really requires a lot of work. But you're just taking this piece inside the absolute value, setting him equal to 0. So 2x minus 7 is equal to 0. Solve for x. We'd end up with 2x is equal to 7. Divide both sides by 2. Looks like x comes out to be 7 halves. So our vertex is going to be 7 halves, comma, we just take this one as it is for our y variable. So that would be 3. Last one, C. For slopes, again, just multiplying this number in front of the absolute value by the number right in front of x. So negative a half times positive 4 comes out to be negative 2. And so essentially what you're seeing there is maybe like because this a value is negative, it'd be opening down. So maybe something like that. You'd be seeing this part, that slope, but notice you're still taking the opposite of that to get the positive slope on the other side. So your slope is still going to also be then positive 2. Going ahead and setting this inside part equal to 0, we can find that x value for our vertex. So then we end up with 4x plus 6 is equal to 0. And again, this is for our vertex. Solving for x, we just subtract both sides by 6. So we end up with 4x is equal to negative 6. Divide both sides by 4. Looks like it comes out to be negative 6 over 4. Simplifying that down comes out to be negative 3 halves when you divide both sides by 2, or top and bottom by 2. So it looks like our vertex is happening at negative 3 halves, comma, we take this guy, this last piece just as he is, negative 3, that's our y value. So there is our vertex. Again, that is example 6 from our 2.7 set of notes.